Excellent. Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to get started with our second episode here of Mythic Mission for Season 2 with a reading. Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow, bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. None has ever caught him yet, for Tom he is the master. His songs are stronger songs, and his feet are faster. So hello and welcome to Season 2 of Episode 2 of Mythic Mission with Professor Michael Chahosky. Today's episode is titled Tom is Master, an interview with C.R. Wiley about his book In the House of Tom Bombadil. We hope that you'll join us on the mission. You can do so at www.patreon.com/Mythic Mission, one word. You'll get some cool Mythic Mission merch and have a chance to collaborate with us in some fun ways. So we'll hope you check that out. And also please note the Tolkien themed tiers. I work very hard on those. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can go to www.mythicmission.com and learn more about me and my book and our podcast. My wife is sometimes sort of my dynamic duo. We do interviews together. We're looking to do more of those this season, so look forward to more Sarah, because I know she's very popular, so that's great. Let me introduce our guest for today, and then we'll go ahead and dive right in. Besides writing for magazines and publishing books, Chris Wiley has been a pastor and still is, a college professor, a commercial real estate investor, a landlord, still is that too, and a building contractor. He has been happily married for over 30 years and has 3 grown children and resides in the state of Washington. He has written for Touchstone Magazine, Modern Reformation, Sacred Architecture, The Imaginative Conservative, love that site, Front Porch Republic, National Review Online, and First Things, among others. His most recent book is the one we'll be discussing today, In the House of Tom Bombadil, which, Chris, was published in December, right?
Right.
He is also the author of The Household and The War for the Cosmos, published by Canon Press back in 2019. His short fiction has appeared in the Mythic Circle, published by the Mythopoeic Society and elsewhere, and the first book in his young adult fantasy series, The Purloined Boy, was published by Cannonball Books in 2017. He is a board member of the Academy of Philosophy and Letters, as well as New St. Andrews College. And he's joining me today to talk about his new book, In the House of Tom Bombadil. Thank you, Chris, so much for joining me.
Well, it's great to be with you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I think I might have told you this in our email correspondence, but I just finished reading the chapters that I know a lot of people have rushed through in the Fellowship of the Ring, which is very, very tragic. The Old Forest, In the House of Tom Bombadil, and The Fog on the Barrow Downs. And I know that I was guilty of this in my early readings and thinking, what does Tom have to, who is this silly fellow? But my kids, and I had read these chapters to them after reading your book. So I think I was as enchanted as they were. My wife was loving it. And just watching the kids' wonder and their interest in this character was a blessing.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So we have some mystery surrounding this character. We've got a lot of great topics to get to. I'll go ahead and dive right in. I will be occasionally looking at Facebook posts. If you guys have any questions, feel free to send them in. If we have some time towards the end, I'll see if we can address them. But another great perk for joining with us on the mission is you can join our Facebook group, which is by invite only if you sign up, and you can also talk with me on there. So without further ado, the first issue I really wanted to ask you about, and this is the one that I feel like everybody who writes about Tolkien has to address at some point, is the issue of allegory. And in your opening apology to your book, you say this, you say, back to the matter of application, while allegories can artlessly shove meaning beneath our noses, there's no such thing as a story without some kind of morality running through it. And when it comes to fairy stories, the morality very often doesn't hide at all. So I really appreciated the way you handled this very sensitively. I'll just ask this and we can go from here, but why do you think Tolkien disliked allegory? Because he did.
Yeah, I think that there are 2 ways to kind of think about allegory, and I didn't get into this in my book, but if we think about the way people thought about allegory in antiquity and in the Middle Ages, it was a much richer way of thinking about it than we think of in terms of it today. Back then, you were tapping into realities that existed outside your head, and language was something that tied you to those realities. Whereas today, we think all the language is in our heads, and consequently, when we make a connection allegorically, we are also providing the kind of the substance to which we're referring. So that means that we're we're more or less forcing people to think like us, and I think that's at the heart of what Tolkien was getting at with his comments about allegory. I don't think he was referring to, what we saw, before. I think he was thinking about, believe it or not, things like Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah.
So now Pilgrim's Progress is probably the best modern allegory, but that's the funny thing about it. I don't think people consider it a modern work, but it is a modern work. It's a very modern approach to thinking about storytelling and how you convey meaning through stories. But I'm a fan of Bunyan. I think that he did a fine job, and it's very imaginative telling.
Sure.
But it's pretty straightforward. Christian is a Christian. Hopeful is hopeful. There's nothing really to work at there. And that's certainly not what we see in Lord of the Rings.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think, and I'm working on a project right now about this, but we often take that same sort of approach that we do with Bunyan with C.S. Lewis, and I know a lot of authors have recently sort of challenged this thesis that it was as an overt and in-your-face allegory, as you mentioned Bunyan, and trying to think of some others off the top of my head, but I don't think that it is. But I appreciate where you're coming from, and I agree. There was a richer sort of medieval understanding of allegory. Tolkien, he goes back and forth in his letters about why he doesn't like it, and that he seems to imply in one letter that he likes one kind of allegory but dislikes another. And I don't think he was confused about the term. I just think that he was using it in ways that were kind of within academia. It's definitely an issue that I feel that every Tolkien scholar or anybody writing about Tolkien has had to tackle. So thank you for handling that so sensitively. And, I guess a follow-up question, do you think that this was because maybe from what you know about the personality of Tolkien, Jesus wasn't always heavy-handed with his, you might say, his apologetic ministry? Do you think maybe that had something to do with?
Well, yeah, I mean, he didn't always explain what he was talking about.
Right.
So if you look at like when I was a new Christian, I encountered the parables, there was a conventional wisdom that ran, well, this is a way to explain difficult concepts through a story. And that's how I understood it. And I think that's the way most people today understand it. There's a problem with that. And the problem is Jesus says the exact opposite. He says, the reason I speak in parables is so you don't get it. Right. Now that presents a problem, because everybody has this sort of democratic sort of outlook that says, well, that's not fair. No. Can only smart people be saved, or things like that. Exactly. And you even had the disciples express some kind of impatience with Jesus on this point. But in antiquity, often, you spoke enigmatically on purpose so that you would force your listeners to work at thinking. Exactly. Now, we don't do that today. You go to your typical TED Talk and everything is like on the lowest shelf possible. It's all intended to make it really super easy for you to get it and not miss the point. Yeah. But what that means is lazy thinkers, lazy listeners, and that kind of thing. So you have to be very attentive and think hard if you get the kind of what Jesus is getting, and then also you need some help from above. To get it. So, and I think the same thing's true with everything prior to the modern era, the rise of nominalism, and we could get into all that kind of stuff. But I do think that one of the things that people miss whenever they read the Inklings in general, but I think especially with Lewis, is Lewis is working from a different metaphysic than most of the vast majority of his fans. Yeah, the vast majority of his fans have no clue what he was up to. And the places where he becomes more kind of transparent when it comes to what he's up to, those are the least popular works. Right. Yeah. Till We Have Faces, or That Hideous Strength. Those are the more challenging works. But there you can pretty much see if you have a background in the history of Western thought, it's pretty clear what he's up to. And I think the thing is true. That's true with Tolkien as well. Sure. One of the reasons why I think some people, claim, well, Lord of the Rings is not a Christian work, because they have no clue how people in antiquity and in the Middle Ages thought. Anyone in those areas, in those times, would say, "Oh, this is a Christian work." Sure, yeah. But a modern person needs to have it right out there on front, no mystery. That's right. And so here's the weird thing. People like your typical, contemporary atheists like a Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins, they have more in common with the typical evangelical and their understanding of the way language works than they have with C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Take that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Doesn't Lewis say something like that, where it's like the post-Christian and the modern Christian has, more in common than those in the Middle Ages? Yeah. Something to that extent. Yeah.
Right.
That's interesting. And I think definitely people need to, consider that not everything is going to be right in front of you. And so we do need to make room. I guess one of the takeaways from here for me is for more mystery and more critical thinking in, not only listening, but in writing as well. So thank you for speaking to that. I wanted to make sure we touched on that first, because I know that a lot of folks I've talked to, especially on social media, they don't even want to discuss any of the possible meanings, especially if they're Christian, before getting over that hump of allegory. And it always sticks out. So excellent. So my next question for you is probably the one that I'm most particularly excited about, and probably many others, is who in the world is Tom Bombadil?
Right.
He's ridiculous. And, as I kind of confess that in my early readings, my younger man readings, I come like, well, who is this guy? I don't, it wasn't in the movies,
Right.
He must not be important. So I kind of
Right.
rushed through it to get to, the Weathertop and then Rivendell stuff. Anyway,
Right.
I can't recall, and I think you point this out in your book, but there's a certain number of times that Frodo and the hobbits ask Tom and or Goldberry. So let's explore Tom's identity and, the significance around that.
Yeah, the first person to raise the question, who is Tom Bombadil, is Tom. He
Yeah.
says when he, do you know who I am?
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
I'm Tom Bombadil, as though that's supposed to explain things.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
and so then it kind of goes from there. And but yeah, I mean, there have been people who love the legendarium, who comb through it looking for some hint of that might indicate this is Tom in the past, kind of like a Melchizedek figure that
Right.
appears mysteriously in some point in the first age or something like that.
Sure.
But no, it's just not there. And so people still working within the framework of the legendarium speculate, could this be, or who could he be? And you tend to see some kind of either speculation that maybe he's a Iluvatar himself, which I think has something going for it.
Could we explain real quick, just for folks? I think most people listening will know, but Iluvatar is,
he's the creator, the one.
Yeah.
And so he that would make sense for a range of reasons. One is the way Goldberry speaks of Tom. So when Frodo asks originally, who is Tom Bombadil, that she says he is. Now, anyone who knows the scripture and can think about like the story in Exodus with the burning bush and all that, that takes you right there. So I was like, oh, okay. So maybe that's what's being alluded to. But the problem with that is Tolkien in a letter said, nope. That's right. That's right. So if we take him at his word, and I'm all for that, then we have to eliminate that. Then the next option is some kind of Valar or Maya, Maiar. And so, I think that's reasonable. And I think, maybe one of the minor, you could say, you think about, Gandalf is Maya, and so is Sauron. And we're never told that in the story. It's something that you kind of piece together a little bit, and then you learn through the legendarium that's who they are. But I think that's reasonable. And so if we were going to stick within the framework of the story, that would be. But there's other stuff in the Lord of the Rings that indicates that there's a kind of deep sublime. When like Gandalf talks about the things that are beneath the surface, when he was fighting the Balrog, and he reports, he talks about these unnameable, almost unnameable things, almost kind of Lovecraftian things. Like what you see at the Watcher at the gate, with all the tentacles, and so there are these mysteries, these enigmas that don't seem to fit anywhere, but are there.
Yeah. I'm all for taking Tolkien at his word too. It's difficult because you want to respect the right of the author, but also Tolkien knew the story is going to take on a life of its own, and he warns us that it's going to have more application that way, and you can get carried away. But I'm really wrestling with that Iluvatar hypothesis. I want to believe that that makes sense, but and there's something that came to mind just to kind of pile onto what you said. Doesn't Tolkien say somewhere in his letters that God is the never named but always present sort of character in the story?
I don't
Something to that
remember
extent.
that. I don't
Yeah,
remember that, but it sounds like something he would
he would
say.
say. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that just I keep coming back to that one. But and then for those again that don't know the sort of jargon of Tolkien, the Maiar and the Valar are the sort of there's different interpretations. In my own book, I kind of argue they might be God's divine counsel.
Right.
They may be archangels and angels. They're lesser spiritual beings, created contingent beings. They're not equal to Iluvatar in any way. And I think a lot of people also have that theology wrong. I always assume Satan is equal to God and is
Yeah.
a
Right.
a separate dualistic sort of view of things, but that's not the case. So for those of you that don't know, so Tom may be one of them, and that's an interesting thesis as well. Um,
Yeah.
I can't recall. Can you remind me? Does Frodo ask a couple of times about who Tom is? I mean, is there
Oh
a
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
He asked Goldberry.
yeah,
We just talked about that. And then he
yep,
asked Tom directly. He
right,
says,
that's right,
"Who are you?" And then
yeah,
Tom's response is as enigmatic as
yeah,
his original introduction. He says, "Don't you know my name yet?" and
oh,
then and then he says something in a kind of offhanded way. Who are
uh-huh.
you by yourself, alone and nameless? And I think that that's a fascinating thing to consider. I mean, the
Yeah,
whole, he's a philologist. He
mhm,
thinks about naming all the time,
yeah,
the power of language. He's not a modern, intellectual who thinks that language is just an arbitrary collection of sounds assigned by some kind of social community to a particular thing.
right.
He, he's old Western man. He
Mm,
believes that language taps into realities that are transcultural,
right,
so I think there's something being hinted at there, and I
certainly.
thought about exploring a little bit, but that
Yeah.
was too deep of a rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, well, I think it gets us, doesn't it? I've just started kind of getting into Owen Barfield, but it gets
Yeah,
into what Barfield argued in Poetic Diction about mythos sort of preceding language
yeah,
rather than language constructing what you were just saying, the world around us, which is more of that anthropological,
yeah,
sociological explanation. Yeah, certainly
yeah,
that wasn't his point of view, Tolkien's point of view.
right.
Yeah, Barfield is deep well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
just finished up his one on idolatry. What was that? Saving the
oh,
Appearances. I just
okay.
read that here maybe a few weeks ago.
Very good. Yeah, I'm new to Barfield, and I have a friend on the Facebook page we've got that is probably coming on the show in a few months to talk more about that, so that our audience,
Yeah,
including me, can learn a little bit more.
yeah.
Yeah, very good. Well, I think that's definitely something for our audience to ponder today about Tom Bombadil's identity. We'll move on to a related issue. So my next question has to do with something you've already mentioned a few times, and I've mentioned too, about the Christian perspective on mystery. Can we just set the record straight? A lot of people seem to talk about mystery as being an equivalent of contradiction. I don't think that's the case. So
No, and I mean,
speak to that.
yeah, I think there's kind of there are modern takes, like Sherlock Holmes is a modern take. A mystery is a puzzle. When you solve the puzzle, the mystery is done.
Mm,
That's crime fiction, that kind of thing.
sure.
I think the ancient understanding and the word mysterion in the Greek is very explicit in this connection. It's carried over into Latin and then into English. That a
Mhm.
mystery is some hidden thing, hidden meaning within another thing, or hidden
Mm,
reality in another thing.
mhm,
So, like when we think about the sacraments,
mhm.
there's some spiritual reality that's hidden in the host, if we're
Yeah.
to use the language of Catholicism.
Mhm,
Certainly that's the way Tolkien, he was a practicing Catholic, very
mhm,
serious kind of pre-Vatican II Catholic.
mhm. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so he would have been very familiar with that. And anybody
Mm,
who is aware of the way people thought again, in antiquity, in the Middle Ages, would know this. It's
Yeah.
only modern people who lose touch with this.
Yeah.
So, people might say, well, is there a biblical, basis for this? Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we're told in Proverbs that it's the glory of God to hide a matter. It's the glory of kings to seek the matter out. So, God does hide stuff all the time.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it offends our democratic sensibilities. God is hiding stuff. Oh, no. Well,
not fair.
Yeah, not fair. The incarnation is that, if you
Yeah.
look at Jesus, just at him and his appearance, a lot of people missed it.
Oh, yeah.
They missed who he was. And, getting it is something that requires God's help. So when, Peter gets it right, when he's asked, who do men say that I am? And Peter gets it right. What does Jesus say? God revealed this to you. My Father in heaven revealed this. It's not because you're so bright, Peter.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't get the credit, buddy.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So when we read Tolkien, when we read Lewis, when we read, any of the writers in antiquity, there's a lot going on. And it's not that they're putting it in. They believe that language itself carried it into the so it's not human ingenuity.
Right.
That's another thing. We think of the, sort of the romantic understanding of the, genius in 19th century idea that, there are these people like Beethoven and Mozart who are so clever they hide things. No, the older understanding is that reality itself is kind of like nesting dolls, Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah.
Inner realities.
Yes. Yeah, that ties into a subject I've been doing a lot of research on about sacramentalism, that there's the higher participating in the lower. And as Christians will know about typology and the archetype participating in the type, or, antitype and type. And I love that. And I think Tolkien definitely had that mentality as a practicing and devout Catholic, which, I think what the most recent book.
And Protestants used to too.
Yes. Let's point that out. Thank you. Yeah, and it's been getting a lot more attention. I know Paul Gould has talked about it in his cultural apologetics book, and I think the big book that's been written recently, Hans Boersma's. I can't remember the title, but you know the one I'm referring to.
Oh yeah, I like Boersma.
Yeah, it's a really great book, very, very helpful for this. So I like this, how this links up with the concept of mystery, that there's something hidden, like the nesting dolls, as you said, something inside another, that there's a higher thing, a higher reality within the lower. And
well, think about us. We are the image of God.
Right.
You can look at us from the outside like a Darwinist does and say, you're just an animal.
Sure.
You're just an animal with drives like any other animal. But there's an insight into human nature that is true, and it isn't something we made up. We are the image of God in the world. Now we're messed up. I mean, we're fallen and all that kind of stuff. But that was the idea from the start.
Well said. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important distinction that we make between mystery and contradiction. And I know I've talked to a previous guest on the show about this as well, Ken Samples. Really, even I think in a lot of our ministries, we encounter modern-minded people always pushing back and saying, "Oh, that's just contradiction," or "You're just slapping the word mystery on there because you can't understand it, and science will uncover it later." I promise. Okay,
right.
So thank you for speaking to that. So my next question has to do with how you start chapter 2, and I don't know. I want to be careful about spoiler alerts, although I put that in my introduction for the podcast episode today. And leaving some mystery in our own show. So if you don't think we can talk much about this without giving too much away, let me know. But you say the future of our world depends on the contents of this chapter. And I think I knew where you were heading with that, but I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit at the beginning of the chapter. Tom Bombadil is master. So why do you say that?
Well, I think that the subject that I'm addressing in that chapter is mastery or dominion. So getting dominion wrong is really bad. Hitler got it wrong. Stalin got it wrong. A lot of us. Well, I think we all get it wrong. And but then the question is, how do you get it right? And that's the challenge. How do you get dominion right? Because I do think it's almost like a ring of power that we've been given that we can't give back. This is something that we can't abdicate. You got a lot of people out there who denounce the Judeo-Christian understanding of God giving human beings dominion in the world.
Mhm.
But just because you denounce it doesn't mean that you've actually abdicated. You've still
Right.
got it. So
Yeah.
what are you going to do with it?
Exactly.
So then the question is, so how do you exercise it in
Sure.
the right way? Now, I think when we look at Christ, we have a picture of that.
Yeah.
When you see me, you see the Father.
Mm.
So
Mm.
so that old, what would Jesus do question is a good question, even though it was worked in all kinds of, sort of cringeworthy
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah. I know.
But but it is important for us to reflect on that, because if we're
Sure.
going to be the image of God in the world, that's tied into dominion.
Mhm.
And we have to think about this. And I think Tom, it provides us with a lot to think about on that.
Yeah. And I know you've been on many shows recently discussing that, but could we speak to it for a minute or two for those who don't know what
Sure.
you're saying, Tom, as it relates to this idea of dominion and to the Christian worldview, perhaps?
Yeah, I think the pregnant conversation, or the one that really has a lot to give us, is that
Mhm.
conversation between Frodo and Goldberry. So
Mm.
when Frodo asks the question, he's very apologetic. He says, "I hope this isn't rude," or something to that effect. But who is this guy? and she responds, like I said, he is. And then Frodo just kind of looks at her like, "What is that supposed to explain anything?" And then she says, "He is the master."
Mm.
And then full stop, period. He is the master. And then she explains he's the master of, wood, water, hill, all the things you see around you. And then Frodo asks, I
Mm.
think, the same question all of us would ask. And that is, does that mean everything belongs to him? And then
Yeah.
she's puzzled, what do you mean? Does
Mhm.
everything belong to him? And then her response is, no, everything belongs to itself. The
Mm.
grass, even the grass belongs to itself,
Mm.
so that's the challenge for us to reconcile those two things. How can mastery be reconciled with freedom?
Mhm.
And how can things belong to themselves and yet be subject to someone else?
Yeah.
That's the big challenge. And we've gotten it wrong in about every way possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then the question is, how do you get it right?
Yes, exactly. And I think Tom and Goldberry can help us there. So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot to be learned from their model, but there's a lot there to meditate on and to reflect very carefully and prayerfully on that model. And I love that middle portion of your book where you really do examine the difference. And I see that kind of pop up in Tolkien's letters. I was looking as I was
Oh,
listening
yeah.
here. Yeah, he this was not, I think, the one I was particularly thinking of, but in letter 186, he says, "Of course, my story, referring to the Lord of the Rings, is not an allegory of atomic power, but of power exerted for domination."
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say some more, but elsewhere he says something else. I was thinking of a different letter, but anyway, yeah, I think there is a difference, and our goal is not to. This makes me think of the Silmarillion a little bit. For those of you who don't know, the Silmarillion is sort of the origin story and stories that Tolkien wrote over a long period of time in his life, and it makes me think of Melkor or
Yeah.
Morgoth and his whole from the very beginning. And he's the most powerful of all Valar, and he wants to have self-mastery. He wants to also have mastery over the theme of Iluvatar. There's that storm battle with the music that they have. It's very, very powerful. And that theme kind of enters into Tolkien's world. And I think he was also trying to point that it's in our own, that we want to have dominion, domination, complete control over all things, including ourselves. And this eats us alive. And
Yeah.
certainly the ring, you say, is another symbol of that.
Yeah.
A thing that's kind of evil in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying, yeah, I think that this is at work throughout human history.
Mm-hmm.
It's been understood that historically, sorcery, uh, kind of necromancy,
Mm-hmm.
um, witchcraft, those were all attempts to exercise control
Mm-hmm.
over spiritual realities. Idolatry could be understood in that manner.
Certainly.
It's a way for us to kind of tap into spiritual realities and make them do what we want.
Right.
And so there's this impulse that runs through, and it works itself out into the modern world through the scientific approach, scientific method. And this
Yep.
is something that a lot of commentators have brought out, but Lewis, very, I think, insightfully does so in The Abolition of Man, where he actually
Mm.
makes that direct connection between magic and science.
Yes. Yes.
And I think
Great
that
book.
I think that's what Tolkien's tapping into too. I have a kind of a reading of that encounter between between Saruman and Gandalf and
Oh yeah.
Orthanc that I
Yeah.
think demonstrates that.
That's another great passage to think of on this. Yeah, very good. Well, okay, I'd love to chat more on that, but I want to ask this next question, make sure we have some time because this is also peculiar. What do you make of Tom's treatment of the ring? My kids love this.
Yeah.
Lucas was,
Yeah,
and I was like,
right.
oh, this is great.
Right.
He commands to see the ring, kind of almost aggressively, or at
Yeah,
least
yeah,
very assertively. But
yeah.
then, what does he do with it? And what can we say about that?
Yeah, well, yeah, he does so very authoritatively, but also in a
Yeah,
jocular sense, which
yeah.
again is something that people in the past would have gotten. So, like, Jove, we're thinking about, the god,
Hmm.
Jupiter. He's
Hmm.
the, in the Roman pantheon known as Jupiter, and in Greek it's Zeus.
Hmm.
But he was a jolly fellow.
Mm.
We know the stories where he's kind of lost his top and he's fleeing lightning bolts at people.
Yeah, those are fun.
but he's also known for his jocularity.
Uh-huh.
And so you see this in Tom at that moment where he's like,
Yes.
"Show me the precious ring."
Mm.
And Frodo immediately brings it out and hands it to him. That's the
Hmm.
only time in the story where that happens. Even when
Yeah.
Gandalf says, "Produce the ring," there's reluctance.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to do that on Frodo's part and Bilbo's. And so
Mm.
there's something about his authority. I think it's being underscored there, but also his amusement, because what he
Mm.
does with the ring, he uses the word precious, and who comes to mind when you hear that? Yeah, of
Hmm.
course, Gollum.
Hmm.
And so we don't know whether or not Frodo told him about Gollum or about
Mm.
Gollum's, name for the ring. But
Right.
it seems as though Tom knows. In fact, Tom knows all kinds of stuff. We're told of that,
Yeah.
about his time with the hobbits, that he knew all about their families.
Yep.
He knew all kinds of things that they didn't expect he knew.
Yeah.
And so he knows, I think this implies he knows that, this ring is precious.
Right.
And then the first thing he does is he holds it up to his eye and kind of goes, "Woo!"
Creepy
and that,
grandpa. Yeah.
and what does that bring to mind? I think it brings to mind the Eye of Sauron. He's
Yeah.
mocking Sauron at that moment.
Yeah.
Sauron is looking for the ring, and here Tom has it in his hand. He said, "I
Yeah.
got it."
Yeah.
and then he puts it on his little finger. This
Uh-huh.
is something that Tolkien makes explicit in the story, is he puts it on the little finger of his big brown hand
Huh.
and he holds it up. And then at that point, everybody realizes he hasn't disappeared. They're like
Right.
shocked. And then
Yeah.
he just laughs. And then he takes it and he flips it in the air and it disappears. He makes
Oh,
the ring
yes.
disappear. And
Yes.
everybody is shocked. And of course,
Yeah.
Frodo is appalled, what's
Yep.
become of the ring? And then, like an uncle at Thanksgiving, he pulls it out and says, "Here you go, boy."
Yeah, he has a heart attack there in that moment. Yeah,
and
definitely.
then Frodo is kind of annoyed that
Yeah.
Tom has made so light of something everybody else has thought really important. So he puts the
Yeah.
ring on his finger and tries, and he disappears, of course, and the other hobbits can't see him. And he tries to sneak away, and Tom just looks right at him and says, "Frodo, take
Yeah.
off that ring."
Right. It's
He said,
amazing that he can see him too, which
right,
is
right.
also telling. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it says so much, and I think it's better to leave it that way. I want our audience to kind of think about what this might entail about Tom, and it's just such an amazing part of the story. And
And I think,
yeah,
Michael, it should tell us something about it, ourselves and our
yeah.
world. We face the same temptation every day
Mm.
to use the powers that we've been granted in the wrong ways to dominate.
Right.
And we need to have that attitude, that jocular, masterful, lighthearted attitude that Tom had.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also as Christians to realize, it doesn't belong to us. We've been given it as stewards to take care of it and to take that seriously. It's very good. Yeah, well, that should give our audience a lot to think about Tom. I want to ask a question that is kind of thematic for the show, and I just wonder. This is kind of slightly off topic, but obviously we can understand, the Lord of the Rings loosely as a myth, as a story. how do you understand the term myth? And do you think Christians, should make use of this term in apologetics? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I
You've looked
guess,
into this?
yeah, I've thought about it some.
Okay. Yeah.
So, when we think about the way the word is used today, we usually, sort of mean a falsehood,
Sure.
a fiction in the worst sense, something that we ought not to believe in because it misleads us.
Right.
That's not the way people in the past thought about myths. People in the past thought about myths as sort of giving you insight into reality in some deep way. Now, this was appropriated in a kind of modern way by Jung, and I think that's one of the reasons why people find Jungian psychology so intriguing, is because the Jungian approach is that the myths give us some kind of deep insight into our own psychology and social, sort of nature that we couldn't express in any other way. The problem with that is that that's where it stops. Jung is a modern thinker. He doesn't believe in the transcendentals. He doesn't believe in reality outside the human head.
Yeah.
So it's all just psychology, kind of
Sure.
deep psychology. But in antiquity, there was a sense in which the myths were getting at things that were really real. Now, they were mingled with other things that we shouldn't buy into, but there were things about the stories that were worthwhile reflecting on, because they did give us some kind of insight into reality as it is in itself. So my thought is, when it comes to myths, and this is, by the way Tolkien was able to speak to Lewis and get him to entertain the Christian faith, because Lewis understood this. Lewis was already a fan of myth. He loved reading the myths, Norse and others, and he wanted to just sort of categorize, kind of like, what's that guy I'm just drawing? Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell just wants to sort of say the Christian story is just another one of those.
Right.
But Tolkien wouldn't go there. He said, no, this is the true myth that happened in the real world. And that was the thing that really arrested Lewis and got him thinking about this in a different way.
Yeah.
That there is a true myth, and that these other myths, in some sense, are imperfect images of it. Sort of, like if you go to like a fun house, like if you go to like an old fashioned fun house, and you go into the mirrors room, you can be in this room and you can see your image kind of being repeated infinitely into the distance, right?
Yes.
And that's a marvelous thing. But there's also then sort of the mirrors that make your head 5 feet tall and your legs 2 inches tall and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so there's a distorting power to the myths.
Absolutely.
That we have to be aware of, but at the same time, they are bearing an image of something that's real. So like when I'm standing in front of a mirror that distorts my image, I'm still real. I'm not being altered by it. It's just the mirror that's inaccurate. But I can still learn some things about.
Sure.
I have blue eyes.
Right. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great concrete image for it. It reminded me of something that Lewis said. I don't know if it was in his Theology, Poetry, or Myth Became Fact, but he said the difference between Christianity and the pagan myths is not a difference between truth and falsehood, but the difference between a real event on the one hand and dim dreams and premonitions of that same event, referring to the pagan myths, on the other.
Yeah. What didn't he refer to them as good dreams?
He did. Yeah, God sent them good dreams.
Yeah,
I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. And speaking of dreams too, that's another thing I've been in my recent reading with my kids on the Lord of the Rings. And I think you pick up on this a couple times, but I didn't realize how often Frodo dreams in the book.
Yeah.
Is it once or twice in Tom's own house, and then once in Rivendell, and I mean it's quite frequent. And there's some powerful things there to learn.
Yeah, and he sees things. The thing that he sees in Tom's house is the end of his own story, which is, I think, an important thing to note. And then when you get to the very end, when he's sailing into the uttermost west, he remembers he had dreamed this in Tom's house.
And we're going to come back to that actually towards the end of the show. That's right. I do have a question, kind of a multi-layered question about eschatology and what you see there. So that's right. I'd forgotten about that. Okay, well, thanks for speaking to the topic of myth. Obviously, it's something that's important to us here in Mythic Mission. It's a big part of our ministry. So my next question has to do with, Tom and Goldberry's relationship. I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit more about this. You think you touched on the theme of the relationship and allude to marriage, and I just wondered if we could speak to that a bit about, is there anything we can learn from Tom and Goldberry's relationship as Christians about marriage?
Yeah.
Are there any lessons there?
Yeah, I think that it's implied that they uh, have natures that in some sense complement each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's not explicit, but you can just see it in the harmony
Mm.
that they enjoy, even in their dance, their movements, how it's described and that kind of thing. The caperings of Tom, the kind of comic caperings of Tom, and then the beautiful and graceful movements of Goldberry.
Yeah.
And, they weave this dance. And I think too, what I take, in that poem, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, being their courtship. I think that's kind of what we got there, and kind of how they interact with each other and how that story ends. So this is something that perhaps people who've not had a chance to read The Adventures of Tom Bombadil should check out. I mean, it's not a long poem. It's usually found in a collection of some of the lesser works of Tolkien. You might find it in a collection that includes Smith of Witton Major and Farmer Giles and stuff. But I think that's a really insightful thing to look at if you want to think about Tom, because it's actually the oldest piece of the sort of the published corpus, except for the Silmarillion.
Right.
So Adventures of Tom Bombadil was published, I think, in 1933. So that makes it older.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it does. Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. So he already had Old Man Willow, the Barrow Wight, Goldberry, and Tom in his mind when he was writing, The Hobbit, and then later Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's incredible. I did not realize that, and I've been meaning to pick up a copy of that. Now I have even more of an excuse. So yeah.
Are you familiar with the poem? Have you read it?
No, only directly through your book. Now this is the first major encounter. Yeah.
So, it's basically this idea of Tom as the master, and all of these different creatures are trying to catch him. So, you got, there's even a character that doesn't make an appearance in the Lord of the Rings, and that's the badger.
Oh, wow.
So all these so the first one to try to catch him is, Old Man Willow. The Barrow Wight tries to catch him. Even Goldberry tries to catch him. So there's this encounter where he's at the Withy window. He's like looking down into the water, and his beard is like hanging down. She reaches up and grabs it and pulls him in.
Yeah.
So he's swimming in the Withy window, and she's like running away or swimming away. I think it's a very flirtatious act.
Yes, I remember that in your book.
Yeah. So, so I think she's signaling to Tom, "I like you."
It's an interesting way to express it. Yeah.
Well, I've known a lot of girls who behave the same way.
There you go.
But the thing about that is then it's an invitation to pursue. Like today when we think about pursuit, we can sort of have to mind the creepy dude that's the stalker come to mind. That we don't want to go there.
No.
In terms of sort of the older idea that there's a certain, drama to the pursuit and the hide and seek, and the playing hard to get, and the coyness and all this kind of stuff is a part of the romance that our ancestors, sort of got and understood. But today we are just too stupid to.
Yeah. No. Sex and love and relationships have been completely distorted in that way. I mean, and it's very tragic. I'm worried about how that's going to work out for my kids as they grow up. Yeah, definitely a concern.
Yeah, I had to coach my kids all along. They're all, so my two oldest are both married. Both my boys are married, lovely women, and they both have kids. And then my daughter is engaged. So apparently it worked out okay.
Yeah, good.
But I had to do a lot of this very thing, to kind of talk to them about it. It's the tougher one is talking to your daughter, because you're reverse engineering.
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, we've got our work cut out for us for sure, especially with this one. 4-year-old going on 15 already. So, oh my gosh, and she will talk your ear off, which is actually not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all.
Great. That's great.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, she is a beautiful little girl. So, okay, I figure with the time we have remaining, there's one last major question I have for you. We just started to touch on And we'll finish with that. And then I just have a little bit of a hint that I want to leave with our listeners, the way you kind of finish your book. So my last major question for you kind of has multiple parts, but I challenged in even my own book that, you know, some Tolkien scholars I've read and people who've written books about Tolkien's Lord of the Rings say that the Lord of the Rings isn't a Christian story because it ends really sadly. I think Ralph Wood's book, Matt Dickerson, I've read a few that make this case. And that's also because there is no presence of salvation or savior of any kind. And then in chapter 6 of your book, you say something along the same lines, but I think you go in a different direction. The return of the king and the end of the Ring of Power don't bring an end to evil, you say in Middle Earth. I agree. Instead, the Lord of the Rings, the end of the Lord of the Rings ushers in the Age of Men and the further graying of the world. I guess my first question is, my instinct was to go to 1 Corinthians 15 and think of kind of an already and not yet framework with Tolkien. I really picked up on that. I feel like you did too. I may have misunderstood you, but do you see a correlation? You know, I guess the first question is between Aragorn's return and God's and Jesus's. And did you ever catch any hints there? Okay.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. I do think that, you know, Aragorn is a type. And, you know, so the return of the king, I mean, how much more explicit can you get than that?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I think it's alluding to also, you know, the Arthurian legend and, you know, once a future king. But I guess the thing that got me, you know, or caught my attention in Tom's story is the episode with the Barrow Wight.
Yes.
So, you know, here we have the hobbits are as good as dead. They're in the tomb, right? You know, Frodo's the only one who's conscious. The others are out. There's a sword over their necks. The Barrow Wight's about to do them in, and Frodo, you know, he resists, but you know, what can a hobbit do?
Exactly.
You know? So then he remembers the song, you know, that Tom taught them, and he sings the song, and immediately Tom appears. Now, what's going on with that? I don't know. Was Tom like waiting outside, just waiting to hear the song, or you know, what's going on with that?
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then we're told that the stones roll away. That should bring something to mind.
Yeah.
And in the opening of the tomb, we see the sun rising. What does that bring to mind? And then we see Tom's head appear. Hello.
Hi there.
You know, hat and feather and all, and he comes in and he puts things right. And he casts the Barrow Wight into the outer darkness. It's a judgment moment where you know Tom's power is on full display. He can cast a Barrow Wight into the outer darkness, and he does. And then he says something that's sort of a throwaway line, but I don't think it's a throwaway line. I think he's getting at something. He says, "Till the world is mended." You know, so he casts the Barrow Wight into the outer darkness and talks about, you know, this is a final act till the world is mended. So this idea of the world being mended is in the background. So this, I think, is the hope that is being alluded to, and perhaps has something to do with Tom's jolliness. You know, he knows how the story ends, you know, and he's happy. And he's not melancholy. He's not nostalgic. You know, there are points where you see him remembering, like with actually when they bring out the treasure, the hoard that was in the barrow, and he finds a brooch, and he holds it up and he says, you know, something about this was once on the shoulder of a beautiful woman or something to that effect. And he's remembering her,
right, as if he was there.
If he's there. And then he says, well, we're going to give this to Goldberry.
Obviously.
That's right. And he says, so we won't forget her, you know, so we'll remember this other woman. And then he, you know, he you know, lets the hobbits run free on the grass. You know, they're sort of like out in the sunshine, enjoying themselves. So I think that's a picture of the end of the world. And I think it's hard to miss if you have a you know, sort of an eye for it.
There's a lot there to reflect on. Certainly says a lot about Tolkien's theology, I think, and what he wants us to see beneath the story. Very deep, but it's there for eyes to see and ears to hear. I think it's very, very poignant. Wow. And I mean, when I finish Lord of the Rings, I do feel sad, but I also feel, like Tom, that we have something to look forward to. I really do get a sense, and I explore this in my book in a whole chapter, that Tolkien was operating with a sort of already and not yet
Yeah.
framework. And I think that especially Christian readers of the Lord of the Rings need to be attentive to that. And on that note, and you've kind of hinted at this, but I love, and I'm sure some people might miss this, but I didn't, because I love to read endnotes and footnotes. I guess it's the nerd and the scholar in me. But maybe leave us with a tiny observation that you have in this postscript to your postscript. I think you say
Right.
here's a postscript to the postscript. A final thought that occurred to me as you were putting the last touches on the book. The first time that Tom saved the hobbits, can you fill in the blanks there for us?
Sure. Yeah. The first
Yeah.
time he saves the hobbits is at a tree, and the second time is in a tomb.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a certain harmony between what occurs there and how we've been saved.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap things up, actually, and to encourage people to go and get your book, and also to read Lord of the Rings if you haven't, and especially if you want to stay friends with me, make sure you read my students. And I'm like, have you guys anybody read the books?
Yeah.
No, silence. You seen the movies? Okay. Do you guys know what a book is? Come on.
There's this weird idea that I think kind of is, at work in the minds of people, that a book only is, every book aspires to be a movie. No, that's the idea that these people have, is that if you're really successful, you'll make a movie of your book, as though that's like, I don't know, the fulfillment of a book.
That's the ideal. And I didn't put this on the sheet, but I wonder, do you have any thoughts or reflections yet about the Rings of Power? I know everybody's been talking about it.
Yeah, well, I didn't watch the films, and I certainly won't watch that. I do think that fan fiction is awful, and this is a kind of fan fiction. And it's like scribbling on top of somebody else's book or someone else's work. So my fear is that we already see this occur, that people think they know Tolkien because they watched Peter Jackson's movies, and it'll only get worse. People will have these layers of kind of woke interpretation kind of layered on top of Tolkien, and miss this. He was one of the great critics of modernity.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that he was attacking the modern world was through his writing, his fiction. And if we use this to further the modern project, and now the postmodern project, it's really out of it's out of the spirit in which the books were written.
Well, and I mean, it fits in with postmodern interpretation of literature, that it's not the author, it's you and I. We have in domination. I'm sorry to say that I've looked at sort of a roundtable discussion. I don't know who these people were, if they were involved in the show or fans or executives at Amazon, but I had a friend send it to me. You know who you are, and kind of spoiled my day. As I heard them talking, trying to be charitable and Christian, but I fear that what you've kind of described is already taking place already, even before the show is released. And it just comes off that, you really have no idea about what the author intended at all. There's no attempt to get to understand who he was or what his vision was. And maybe that's an unpopular point of view. And I'm a dinosaur like C.S. Lewis, and that would make you too, I guess. And I'm happy to be one. But I'm concerned. So I haven't really shared my thoughts about that yet, but definitely cautious and concerned. So.
Yeah, well, we could kind of think about three phases in terms of how we understand language and literature. In antiquity, and I would include, the Middle Ages in this, the understanding is that language has a kind of access to a reality that exists outside of us. And then when, we enter into the modern period with the Enlightenment and so forth, the way we understand reason and language is that it's referring to things that are going on in our heads. Now, there's a kind of intersubjectivity, but there's still a reality. Like when we think about Kant and folks like him, and he's still talking about a reality that is sort of bigger than us as individuals. The postmodern thing is that we are so deeply into ourselves that we're not only are we out of touch with this larger reality, we're out of touch with anything outside of ourselves. And it's just all about us. Yeah. And so when we get a story that we like, we feel like we have the authority to just kind of run with it and make some kind of big ego trip out of it. And so I think that that we're in a very bad place, just generally speaking, in our culture, period.
Yep.
And this is another demonstration of it, that the very means by which, people like Tolkien and Lewis and others were trying to deliver us from this has become a means by which we dig ourselves deeper into it.
Much deeper. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you for commenting on that. And thank you again so much for joining us, spending an hour of your time. I really appreciate it. And it was nice to meet you.
Yeah, same here, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. We'll see you, everybody, back on the mission on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. And